Hey, how's it going? So something funny happened last week. I was making a goofy video with some super basic maths in it to illustrate how powerful Dyson swarms could hypothetically be. It's purposely a super high level video, it's very hand wavy of the details, it doesn't say how, when and why something like this would ever actually be constructed, but it was just meant to demonstrate why Dyson swarms are an amazing hypothetical idea if a civilization can realize them. Of course, I'd love to and intend to make more videos going into more depth on that subject, but there have been a few people who suggested I'm a f***ing idiot and I need to go watch a video called Dyson Spheres Are a Joke that just happened to be released like a day before my video went up. Now, based on what a few folks said to me about it, it sounded like this video conclusively debunked Dyson anything, Dyson architecture in general, any kind of megastructure architecture that surrounds a star. So I thought that sounds really interesting. I'll have to watch it at some point, but I ran into the minor problem, which is that people wouldn't stop fucking telling me about it. So fine, I'll go watch it. Give me a sec. And done. I enjoyed that video, it was really fun. It was fun to go through Dyson's paper again. I always forget how short that thing is. It's shorter than, I'm not gonna make a dick joke. Not to state the obvious, but if you haven't watched the video, maybe go watch it before watching this one, or you're not gonna have anything to reference this video against. I think the overarching note of criticism that I would have for this video is that it maybe doesn't do as good a job as it could separating out Dyson spheres from Dyson swarms, because Dyson spheres would be borderline magic and, in my opinion, completely pointless to actually build, whereas Dyson swarms are not only physically possible, but I genuinely do think actually realizable by humanity in the far future and genuinely likely for us to build in the far future based on the needs that we are likely to have. And those needs are generalizable, whether we're talking about fleshy human beings like we exist right now that eat shit, fart and fuck like we do, or whether we all do some weird wacky techno nonsense. I think maybe people are coming away from this video not realizing how outrageously different those two concepts are from each other. And so folks are kind of grouping them all into one bucket in their head and then feeling as though anyone that discusses any of these types of ideas with any timeline attached to it is either not in on the joke or they're one of the tech bros, which, needless to say, is a sentiment that I respectfully disagree with. To be fair though, the person that posted the video does say right at the beginning that they don't have an issue with people that like Dyson sphere-y type ideas. It is more those tech bro people that they have a problem with, which is understandable. They are pretty f***ing insufferable. But then throughout the video, there's a lot of time spent calling all of these ideas broadly stupid, which I think in the mind of the audience goes quite a long way to undermining that goodwill sentiment that was established at the beginning of the video. Anyway, I don't just like Dyson swarms because I think they're cool. I mean, I do think they're cool, but I also think they're logical. So I want to try and extract what were the main arguments against them in this video and offer some gentle counter-arguments. First things first, in the interest of not having all 320,000 of this person's subscribers show up at my door and kick my ass, I want to be clear, I'm not beefing with this person. Okay, so don't go over to that video and be a douchebag in the comments, okay? Only I get to be a douchebag. Seriously, be nice. I'm sure you all would be nice anyway, but just don't be fucking stupid. Also, this YouTuber is clearly a highly qualified physics academic. If them and me were put in some kind of saw trap that forces us both to analyze physics problems, I'm definitely the one getting my eyes ironically scooped out and replaced with Kinder eggs because I never truly appreciated the little surprises in life or whatever. So if this really came down to just hardcore analyzing the physics problems, they would win. But I don't think that's what was done in this video. And again, fair enough, a lot of it was spent analyzing Dyson's paper, which also didn't go into it. Anyway, here are the main points I think are made in this video broadly against any kind of Dyson style architecture. Let me know if you think I'm fairly representing the views expressed in the video. Whilst the video itself is almost an hour long and touches on a lot of different subjects, I think the arguments against Dyson architecture in general basically come down to 3 points. 1, that Dyson proposed the idea as a joke in the first place. 2, tech bros misunderstand and push the idea as something to actually do, which is the only reason why anyone discusses it as a realistic project. And 3, the desire to build a Dyson sphere is based on faulty reasoning, and they'd be so prohibitively difficult to build that it's kind of borderline impossible to imagine a situation in which one ever would actually be built. I think all the arguments presented ultimately come down to these points. Let me know if you think that's fair or not. I think it is, but I don't want to misrepresent the video. Alright, let's get stuck in. And sorry if my voice sounds terrible today, I've been sick all week. If you've ever seen One Man, One Jar, just that, but my throat, that's how I feel. Okay, so first up, Dyson spheres were just a joke. That's the meaty shaft of this video. So here's the setup. There's this thing called SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. SETI is a variety of projects intending to try and capture extraterrestrial signals of some kind. The initial premise was to listen for radio transmissions from space across a huge number of wavelengths in the hopes of receiving some kind of signal that could be proven to be a techno signature, a signal transmitted by an an alien civilization as some form of interstellar communication. Now, the Dyson spheres are a joke video makes the claim that some members of the scientific community do not like SETI. They believe it to be a waste of time and resources because there's no reason to presume that we would find alien transmissions. And the video indicates that Dyson was one of these people. And so, Dyson wrote a scientific paper essentially making fun of SETI by arguing for the existence of something which is obviously ridiculous, which SETI would then have to bite the bullet on and go looking for, which would almost be a tacit admission that they know that they're wasting their time in the first place. Imagine saying, "Oh, I'm so thirsty I could drink anything right now," and then your friend pisses in a cup and hands it to you like, "You said you drink anything, come on, you gotta do it." Basically that, except science instead of piss. Okay, so that whole thing happened with a paper being written by Dyson jokingly telling SETI to go look for some stupid Dyson sphere thing. Then because of the paper, sci-fi writers came across the idea of Dyson spheres without knowing the context of it being a joke, and they treated Dyson spheres as though it's some kind of serious design proposal, resulting in the likes of the Star Trek episode where the Dyson sphere shows up. And then tech bro CEO guys that we have now, who are professionals at misunderstanding everything at the best of times, who grew up with Star Trek, now insist that we should build one, meaning that tech bro CEOs are the reason that any of us are talking about this Dyson sphere stuff with any amount of seriousness, instead of recognizing it as the obvious joke that Freeman Dyson originally intended it to be. Okay, that's a good story, good narrative. On the surface it all makes sense, but I'm not totally sure of the premise. It might be correct, but I haven't been able to verify that it is correct, and I have found evidence that kind of points in a different direction. First off, if you check out that Freeman Dyson interview that was shown in the Dyson spheres are a joke video, it's clear Dyson doesn't just refer to the Dyson sphere paper as a joke, but also another paper that he wrote, and unless I'm mistaken, I don't think that other paper has anything to do with SETI.
You wrote a paper some time ago on the question of whether life could survive indefinitely in an expanding universe.
Right.
And you've been discussing that lately. You invented this concept of what's now called the Dyson sphere, which crops up in the science fiction literature sometimes.
Yes, I mean, both of those items really have nothing to do with work. Those were both of them essentially just little jokes, and it's amusing that, of course, you get to be famous only for the things you don't think are serious.
Also, for Dyson spheres to be a literal ha-ha joke, that joke kind of hinges on Dyson being one of these anti-SETI scientists, unless I'm misunderstanding and the joke was kind of a reversed joke, where the joke is him joking about the people who would have made the joke that he was making, which seems a little meta to me. In any case, I'm not arguing that Dyson was necessarily SETI's #1 fan or whatever, but the thing is, you can find footage of him singing the praises of SETI.
This was, of course, a great contribution Cocconi and Morrison made in 1959. They calculated what you could actually detect with existing radio telescopes over very large distances, and it turned out that you could detect our present-day radio transmissions if they were transmitted from here to someplace else in the galaxy. And if the aliens at the other end had a similar telescope receiving the signal, even with our present equipment, you could communicate over thousands of light years. In fact, not quite all the way across the galaxy, but over a substantial part of the galaxy. So it was technically within reach to communicate with aliens over these enormous distances. So they proposed that we actually listen for the aliens. They might be transmitting on the radio and we might be able to hear what they're saying. So that was the Cocconi-Morrison proposal, which I thought was a brilliant idea, and it made sense from every point of view. The beauty of it is that it doesn't cost much to implement. So right away, Frank Drake in the first year started a search program at Green Bank with the existing telescope, actually listening. He proved the feasibility of it, and it was an extremely cheap program. Total expenses were a few $1,000s just for a little bit of detecting equipment and data processing, and that's all he needed. And from that beginning, it has continued now for 40 years. So there is a very active program going on. It's increased in its data processing power by factors of billions since Frank Drake, but still the equipment is quite cheap and the running costs are small. So this is actually all being done with private money. It's not funded by the government, and so it's one of the most cost-effective things you can do in the whole of astronomy. If we did discover any aliens, of course it would be an enormous revolution in our whole way of thinking, and so I'm 100% in favor of this searching for the radio signals.
I think that Freeman Dyson maybe meant that his paper was a joke in the sense that it was gently poking fun at SETI for having a slightly too narrow vision for what to look for. Not that he hated SETI. If anything, he was trying to make SETI better at what it was trying to do. Maybe he also called it a joke in the sense that he simply didn't put that much effort into the paper, because the paper was him having a good idea, but ultimately just tossing it out there and saying, hey, why don't you look for infrared radiation in case aliens aren't trying to actively communicate with anybody? And that interpretation checks out given the way that Dyson speaks about it. In the interviews that he's given, he quite clearly thinks that the idea is a good one. I don't think that he thinks that Dyson spheres are some stupid idea. Just listen to him.
But it occurred to me in 1960, I think a year after Cocconi and Morrison, that there might be aliens who were not communicating, that they might not want to communicate, or they might have other means of communicating. What about detecting them, and how could we detect uncommunicative aliens? And there's another way which I got interested in. So if you look down from a couple of thousand miles up with infrared telescope, what you see are flares from oil fields primarily. That's the brightest patches on the earth are in Kuwait. Then after that you see, of course, big cities where humans are congregated. Everywhere where there is large-scale human activities, you see infrared radiation. And that's just a result of the second law of thermodynamics, that wherever humans are doing big engineering projects, they have to radiate away the waste heat just because of the laws of thermodynamics, and it gets radiated away in the infrared band. So why not apply that to the universe at large? So if there are extraterrestrials who are expansionist or have not controlled their populations, who are doing enormously big engineering projects, they'll also will have to radiate away their waste heat, and so they should be detectable over huge distances. So I propose looking for these artificial sources of infrared. I published a little one-page letter in Science.
I mean, he's spoken on lots of occasions about all kinds of different stellar-scale engineering that, again, tends to get equated with tech bro nonsense, but which the likes of Dyson were totally on board with, at least conceptually.
As far as the laws of physics are concerned, it's quite possible to take planets apart simply by spinning them up. You can apply a homopolar generator to a planet and spin it up faster and faster until the equator flies away and becomes a disk. Mm-hmm. And so in principle you can do that. I wasn't advocating that, but merely pointing out that the aliens might in fact have done that, and that would be a good way of getting material if they wanted to do large-scale engineering.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if there were even more meanings to it being a joke. Like, I wonder if he meant the whole situation surrounding his paper and the way he was remembered because of it was a joke. See, the Dyson Spheres Are a Joke video argues that Dyson came up with this big solid shell surrounding a star, and that tech bros have tried to kind of create a version of it that would work by making a swarm of objects. And I'll admit, reading the paper again, it does sound like Dyson is talking about a solid object. He doesn't do a good job of describing specifically what he was imagining. Or at least I don't think he does, but maybe I'm f***ing stupid as well. But in pretty much every single interview that he's done, he's clarified that what he meant really was a swarm of objects. That's literally what he was envisioning in the first place.
What are these Dyson spheres or Dyson shells that I've heard about?
Well, it was really a joke which has been completely misunderstood, but anyway, no, what really happened was 40 years ago I published a one-page note in the journal Science, which was called Search for Artificial Sources of Infrared Radiation. And the idea was that you might have intelligent people in the sky, or intelligent creatures, who were actually pursuing a vigorous life but weren't interested in communicating. And we had just the year before that, Frank Drake had started listening for radio signals from aliens, and that was fine as long as the aliens were trying to communicate. But it occurred to me that you might want to detect aliens even if they weren't communicating, and there was a way to do it, and that would be to look for infrared radiation, which is essentially waste heat. So if there is a society who has suffered a population explosion and is growing very large, or has just a very highly developed industry, it's compelled by the laws of thermodynamics to get rid of the waste heat. You can't exist without getting rid of waste heat, and that has to be radiated into space. And so you'll see that heat radiation as infrared. So I suggested that people actually start looking in the sky with infrared telescopes as well as radio telescopes. So that was the proposal. But unfortunately, I added to the end of that the remark that what we're looking for is a artificial biosphere, meaning by a biosphere just a habitat, something that could be in orbit around a neighboring star where the aliens might be living. And the word biosphere didn't imply any particular shape. And however, the science fiction writers then got hold of this and imagined that biosphere means a sphere, and that it has to be some big round ball. And out of that there came these weird notions which ended up on Star Trek.
Oh yeah. In fact, just based on secondary accounts, I had imagined some giant sphere whose function was to capture all of the energy of the sun so that none would go to waste. Is that completely erroneous?
Well, except it shouldn't be a sphere, of course.
Right.
But I imagined, in fact, a swarm of objects surrounding a star. I mean, that would be the way to use all the starlight, and so it would look essentially from the outside rather like a dust cloud.
A solid sphere built around a star wouldn't be passively stable if you built it, nor would it offer any obvious benefit benefits that a variety of other things a civilization could otherwise do with that matter would offer. Dyson's idea was a Dyson swarm. It was not what we refer to now as a Dyson sphere. That was the general public's misunderstanding of it. Although again, Dyson really did not make that clear in his paper, so I get why people would misunderstand that. If I were reading this without any other context, I would probably misunderstand it as well. Like, he literally uses the word shell, and I think the context in which he uses that word is him just illustrating how much matter a solar system would hypothetically have to play with, but still, that's another source of confusion for people. So I think a large amount of the problem was Dyson not communicating clearly, but he really did mean a swarm of objects. He meant a Dyson swarm. That's what he was trying to describe. He was just doing it within a very tight word count, and a Dyson swarm is reasonable because it's essentially just a bunch of satellites. You could increase the number of satellites until you fully surround the star, but that's not even necessary. You could build one that only collects 0.001% of the sun's light, and it would still be a form of Dyson swarm. And this misunderstanding and the fact that people know him as the hard sphere around a star guy is something that he clearly laments in a lot of these interviews.
The science fiction writers imagined it then to be a spherical, rigid object, and the aliens would be living on some kind of artificial shell, a rigid structure surrounding a star, which wasn't exactly what I had in mind. But in any case, that's become then a favorite object of science fiction writers. They call it the Dyson sphere, which was a name I don't altogether approve of. But anyway, I'm stuck with it. But the idea was a good one.
Think about it. If you spent your life making immense contributions to science, and then one day you kind of non-committally write down an idea that fits on one side of a piece of paper, and you're very loose and vague about it, but it's just an intuition that you have, and you throw it out there for fun, and then people totally misunderstand your idea and name their incorrect understanding of your idea after you, and forget what you were actually trying to describe. And then half a century later, people are still asking you about this stupid idea that you never had in the first place, which still has your name attached to it. What would your first words be on the topic at that point? I would probably try and distance myself from it. I would probably call the whole thing a fucking joke. So Dyson's idea wasn't a solid sphere, and I don't think he was making a really pointed ha-ha isn't SETI stupid joke. I don't think that was the intention. Yes, he uses the word joke in interviews, but, and maybe this is a failure on my part, but I haven't been able to find an interview where he clarifies that the punchline of that joke is that the search for extraterrestrial intelligence is a stupid idea. What he does clarify is that he never proposed a solid object surrounding a star as a thing that would ever be built, and he's very annoyed that people have that misconception. But the Dyson spheres are a joke video has actually reinforced that misconception. Am I wrong? Am I losing my fucking mind? I feel like I need to pencil Dyson in for another 5 or 10 years of rolling in his fucking grave, because still no one is understanding what he fucking meant. Breathe, Zan. Breathe. Sorry to interrupt, this is just a quick message to say, statistically speaking, you're probably not subscribed, so I'll make you a deal. Press the subscribe button and I won't come over to your house and do this. Alright, thanks. Back to the video. Next up, the idea that Dyson spheres are just tech bro nonsense. Well, I've already gone through the idea that Dyson really did imagine a swarm in the first place, and that that's a lot more reasonable than a solid sphere. But those tech bro CEO guys do still talk about this sometimes, and I get not liking the whole modern tech CEO thing. You know, you have Bezos talking about moving all heavy industry off Earth so that Earth can become this precious garden where all the people and animals can live in peace and harmony. But the actual human beings he's in charge of that work at Amazon have to piss themselves to get through a shift. You got Zuckerberg running a company that's meant to connect human beings together, but he behaves like someone who needs to have human emotions streamed into his head with a fucking satellite dish. I mean, a few years ago, Elon Musk was almost, arguably, a kind of a feel-good underdog guy that managed to become a billionaire against all odds, at least if you ignore that weird submarine tunnel rescue episode thing. But then he wiped his ass with all that feel-good sentiment the second he jumped butthole first into insanely divisive politics. And the list goes on. Like, these goofballs are among the most powerful human beings on the planet right now, and it's not as if we elect these motherfuckers, and the amount of power they wield is more than some countries. So I agree with the general sentiment that there's a lot to be concerned about there. However, there is a very simple, logical point I want to make here, which is probably going to sound stupid and patronizing because it is so simple, but I think it is relevant, particularly having established that Dyson himself meant swarm in the first place, so it's not as if tech pros have done anything to bring that idea forward. Here's the point. If someone I don't like says something, that doesn't mean I need to disagree with that thing that they've said. Like, you can and should take things like that on a point-by-point basis, which is obvious, right? I know we all think that's obvious, but it is a little easy to get lost in the sauce with this, particularly when it comes to like political type stuff. Like, use me as an example. I personally feel that Donald Trump is a moron. I know, that's not the bravest stance to have, but it is true to say. I wouldn't trust him unattended with a ham sandwich, much less the fate of the human species. However, if he wakes up tomorrow and says something like, "In the United States, we have the best fighter jets, the greatest, the fastest. We have the best fighter jets in the world. You wouldn't believe how great our fighter jets really are. Just because I think he's a prick doesn't mean I need to disagree with that opinion. Like, to my understanding, the F-22 is the most capable mass-produced air supremacy platform. I think that's correct. I wouldn't need to reject that idea because someone that I don't agree with generally articulated that same idea. Again, I know that's obvious, but just to curl this back into something vaguely resembling a point, saying tech bros bad, tech bros talk about Dyson spheres, therefore Dyson spheres bad, is a bit of a politics-brained way of interfacing with reality. Like, I agree, tech CEOs and their army of sycophantic tech bro dudes are really fucking annoying. And these tech CEOs, again, varies a bit on a case-by-case basis, but they're mostly businessmen cosplaying as intellectuals, and they tend to come out with a lot of harebrained, stupid fucking ideas. Like, the number of times there's been some kind of tech bro startup that's tried to revolutionize transportation and they've just ended up inventing trains with extra steps is fucking hilarious. But the fact that those people talk about Dyson spheres doesn't make the concept wrong. Last up, Dyson spheres don't work on a technical level, whether that being the reasoning for creating one or the physics and engineering that goes into building one. If we're honest, the previous 2 points are actually kind of neither here nor there. This is the one that actually matters. And this is the one I was most confused about in the context of people sending me this video, because again, this video was interesting. I really enjoyed checking out Dyson's paper again. But near the end of the video, there's some discussion around, well, if you wanted to build some kind of Dyson sphere, Dyson swarm type thing, how do you do X? How do you do Y? How do you do Z? And that's kind of it, which is not really an argument. Again, I'm not saying it's necessarily trying to be an argument. It's just, I'm not really understanding why people think asking a question about Dyson spheres defeats the concept of Dyson spheres. A lot of the questions are really good questions, like what is the thermal management system? If you're collecting energy and distributing it elsewhere, how do you distribute it? How does that work? Do you store the energy somewhere? These are genuinely good questions, but they are just questions. There's no, this is definitely impossible because, and then some kind of technical analysis. It's not there, which is fine. The video's not trying to do that. I don't know why people think the video is trying to do that. And I certainly don't understand why they think it succeeds at the thing that it's not even doing, particularly to the extent that they're eager to not listen to anyone else say anything about it. The fuck? And in fact, most of these questions at least partially answer themselves if you think of the structure in the proper context, which is to say a swarm of objects, not one big solid object. Now, insofar as the reasoning as to why you would want to make a Dyson sphere in the first place, the video argues that it's a bit dumb to imagine that we'd ever want the entire sun's worth of energy. But that does strike me a little bit like a caveman saying, why would you want an entire oil barrel worth of energy? I think it's a bit of a failure of imagination. More energy just means more capability to do more things. The sun's energy would enable astonishing feats of engineering, including becoming an effectively post-scarcity civilization, which is in literally everybody's best interest. Also, the Dyson spheres are a joke video talks about how a massively increased population wouldn't necessarily lead to massively increased energy usage, which, okay, couple points. If you're actually making a Dyson swarm, it doesn't really matter how many people you've got. What matters is how much energy you want to use, right? Like, large energy use doesn't necessarily just come from large population, is what I'm saying. You could have a fairly small population that still wants to have a lot of energy at their fingertips. But the other thing is, like, fair enough, more advanced technology does often mean more efficient technology, but realistically, more efficiency liberates more resources, and then whatever population you have will expand to thrive by utilizing those resources until they reach some new equilibrium, either by literally making more people or by increasing the well-being of the people within their society. You know, it's like when you get a pay rise and you feel like you've got loads of money, but then your lifestyle adapts to it and then you feel normal again. Or like, it's only September right now and I'm freezing my balls off here and fighting the urge to put the heating on because I don't want to spend money or do a global warming unnecessarily. But if we suddenly had a full nuclear fusion power grid tomorrow and my energy bill suddenly became 1/100th of what it currently is, fuck it, I'm turning the heating on now. You know what I mean? Life arranges itself to exploit the available energy and resources, and I'm not seeing an obvious reason why we wouldn't exploit the ball of cosmic energy that's literally right there, if that's an option, which on a long enough timescale it effectively is. Although that timescale is important. Again, this may be the tech bros affecting discourse on this a little bit, but reasonable discussion of how you'd go about doing this does not involve a Dyson sphere being constructed some number of mere decades from now. Personally, I tend to think of Dyson swarms as something that we won't even need an incredibly limited version of one for hundreds of years. And if we're talking a 100% coverage, fully realized one, I mean multiple thousands of years, probably, in the future. Also, probably done in other star systems so it's not screwing with the Earth. Actually, sorry, slight detour for a sec. In my last video, I was talking about a hypothetical 1% coverage Dyson swarm, and I said that you could organize the satellites to orbit the sun in such a way where it doesn't block out any of the light from the Earth, but that even if you did, if it was only blocking out 1% of the light, it probably wouldn't be that big of a deal, because the Earth's orbit increases and decreases the amount of solar radiance the Earth is getting by about 7% per year, so 1% wouldn't make a huge amount of difference. But I've thought about that more and I actually don't think that's true, and while I was still on the same topic, I thought I might as well just correct the record slightly. There is a difference between the sunlight that the Earth's receiving varying varying by 7% per year but going back and forth, versus it permanently decreasing by 1%. Like, I was fairly non-committal about it when I said it in the first place, but I thought about it more, and yeah, I think 1% actually would have a pretty big impact. Not that this really matters, because again, you could just construct it in a way where the panels never go in front of the sun from the Earth's perspective, so it's not really a conversation we need to have anyway, but I just thought I'd clarify while I have the opportunity. Anyway, what else? There is a segment where the video talks about how destroying Jupiter to build a Dyson sphere would result in the solar system destabilizing, which is true, but again, I think that's only what Dyson was saying in his original paper as a hypothetical, as kind of like the extreme of what could be done in the solar system given the amount of mass we've got, hypothetically. But for any kind of realistic conversation about how you might do this in reality, again, you replace that solid version with a swarm, you replace material harvested from Jupiter with maybe taking them from Mercury instead, and then building them much closer into the sun, even closer in than Mercury's orbit, and instead of doing 100% solar coverage, you do some minute fraction of the sun's output, and also probably replace a centrally coordinated construction project with some loose societal trajectory that takes place over hundreds or thousands of years, and suddenly it doesn't destabilize the solar system and the whole thing looks a lot more reasonable. Like, it's easy to make these ideas sound silly because the numbers are very big and the timescales are very long, but that's not really a hard argument. It's not as if projects with big numbers and long timescales associated with them never happen. Fair enough, not ones this big and this long, but, you know, precedent of shit that's happened before does not account for everything that could ever happen. And it's easy to make anything sound stupid if all you do is talk about the stupidest conceivable version of that thing. Like, imagine if someone in the 1800s was first trying to come up with the idea of a car, and they kind of had a loose idea of how combustion engines might work, you know, something to do with burning a little bit of fuel at a time with reciprocating cylinders going back and forth, and you could use that energy to maybe, you know, turn a rod that would turn wheels, and you could use it for, you know, some kind of efficient personal transportation, something like that, but they've not worked out all the details precisely, and then someone else comes along and goes, a vehicle so small wouldn't be big enough to carry all the coal it needs, which obviously doesn't debunk the concept of a combustion engine, it just misrepresents it. To us, that's obvious, but I think discussing Dyson spheres and Dyson swarms as if mechanically they're fairly similar to each other is to make the same kind of mistake. Also, last thing, when discussing why Dyson swarms are stupid, the video does say at one point, why would we build a Dyson swarm when we could just go to other star systems? And I'm still trying to work out the logic of that question. Like, one of those things is transportation, and the other one is power generation. It's like going, should I charge my phone, or should I do the opposite of charging my phone, which is moving to Finland? What? Those two things aren't even in the same category, nor are they mutually exclusive. I think this was maybe in the context of imagining the Earth inside a giant sphere that you couldn't escape from, which, you know what I'm going to say, just fill in the blank. I think considering this in terms of it being a swarm also solves a lot of the problem with thermal management, because that was brought up as to how you don't just like cook the Earth, but again, that wouldn't happen if you use a serious version of this idea. But don't get me wrong, there are some serious engineering problems with creating any of these ideas, even the most plausible version of a Dyson swarm, because a Dyson swarm could be a collection of individual habitats surrounding a star that individually collect the power that they need for their own requirements, like for the people that live on that station. But then you got to ask the question, well, how do you build something probably the size of an O'Neill cylinder and get it all the way to an orbit within Mercury? That requires a huge amount of energy, so you probably have to build it with the materials from Mercury, which is why people talk about Mercury a lot, because for one, there's usable construction materials there, but two, it orbits very close to the sun, and counterintuitively from an orbital mechanics perspective, getting in really close to the sun is arguably more difficult and requires more energy than going interstellar. Alternatively, you could just have people living on a planet and you beam the energy to them somehow, but then exactly how do you design the laser system to do that? How do you make sure the tracking is accurate enough? How do you make sure the whole thing doesn't just become weaponized? Everyone's gangster till the sun starts firing Kamehamehas. Like, how big are these solar collector installations? Are they meters across or kilometers across? What is their thermal management system? How do you maintain them? How do you keep them in the orbit that they need to be in? What orbital configuration do you even put them in? These are all really interesting questions. So I'm not trying to gloss over this as if it's easy. No, it's plausible and it's reasonable and understandable that a civilization would want that energy. I mean, the sun is basically the ultimate fusion reactor, and it's just there, naturally, passively. We don't need to do anything to make it be there. It's just there, and it's going to be there for billions of years. So why not collect that energy? It's a really interesting topic. Anyways, those were the notes that I have. Once again, just to be clear, we're all friends. Peace and love, etc. No homo. Okay, just a reminder, don't go be a dick in their comment section. Okay, be f***ing nice. If I catch anyone being an asshole, I'm going to break into your house and eat one of your children. Alright, I'm going to go lie down and snort some Lemsip. Alright, as always, thanks to my elite level supporters, Thunderbolt22A10, who consumes 3 gigawatts of power every time he does a squat thrust, Nomad Greg, whose real name requires you to have 7 tonsils to pronounce it correctly, Andrew Maul, who doesn't understand spoons, John Bejarano, who's going to go back in time and become his own grandfather, but he doesn't know that yet, and JDK0 Durso, who descended from a race of squid people. And thanks to all my other supporters too. Don't forget to check out the Patreon or the channel membership, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one. Over and out.